Hello, I'm John David Bruja on location.
Nabo Island Lighthouse.
Cape Elizabeth West Lighthouse. Portland Head Lighthouse. Spring Point Ledge Lighthouse. Portland Breakwater Lighthouse. Burnt Island Lighthouse. Owl's Head Lighthouse. Marshall Point Lighthouse. Pemaquid Point Lighthouse. And welcome to a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Southern Maine and New Hampshire Tour. It is the last and final episode of the United States Lighthouse Society Southern Maine and New Hampshire Tour.
Well, today we will begin and end here in Camden, Maine, as we are taking an 8-hour cruise to see approximately 11 lighthouses. 2 of them, which I saw yesterday, Owl's Head, which we got to tour, and then, of course, Rockland Breakwater Lighthouse, which Carlene and I saw when we left the Maine Maritime Museum and walked down to the dock. Now, our tour group will be separated into 2 different boats, and Carlene and I will be boarding the Periwinkle here. Our first lighthouse, Perkins Island Lighthouse. It was established in 1835, but the current one was built in 1896. It stands at a height of 25 feet and marks the entrance to Camden Harbor. It was automated in 1972, and the cylindrical brick tower is located on the southern end of a 7-acre island. We now are at Grindle Point Lighthouse. First established in 1851, the current in 1874 at a height of 39 feet. Also on the grounds is a keeper's house, a boathouse, and an oil house, and it marks the entrance to Gilkey Harbor. Our next lighthouse on the cruise, number 3, will be Dice Head Lighthouse. It was established in 1829 at a height of 51 feet, deactivated in 1937, and replaced by a skeletal tower south of the light, but it was destroyed by a storm in 2007. The original light was reactivated again in 2008. Now, number 4 on our cruise, Pumpkin Island. First arrived in 1854 at a height of 17 feet. It had a 5th order lens, and it was one of the first Fresnel lenses to be used in Maine. A boathouse arrived in 1885, a storage shed in 1902, and an oil house in 1906. Pumpkin Island was discontinued in 1933. Now number 5, a unique pair of lighthouses, Eagle Island. They arrived in 1838 at a height of 30 feet, located on cliffs overlooking East Penobscot Bay. It's located on an island only 1 1/4 mile long by 1/2 mile wide, and it was automated in 1988. And only one of the lighthouses still remains active today. Next up, number 6, Deer Island Thoroughfare, also known as Mark Island Lighthouse. It arrived in 1858 at a height of 39 feet with a 4th order lens, automated in 1958, and it's one of the first female lighthouse keepers in Maine, and the keeper's house unfortunately burnt down in 1959. Deer Island now functions as a wildlife refuge. Number 7 is a spark plug, Goose Rocks Lighthouse. It first arrived in 1890 at a height of 50 feet with a 4th order lens, located near New Haven at the east entrance to Fox Island Thoroughfare. Next up, number 8 on our list of lighthouses, Browns Head. First arrived in 1832, the current at 20 feet came in 1857 and is located on the northwest corner of Vinyl Haven Island. It was automated in 1987 and is one of the last lighthouses in Maine to be automated. Unfortunately, we hit a rough patch, but we avoided the storm on our way to our next lighthouse, Owl's Head Lighthouse, which we saw yesterday by land. Now we are on our way to our next lighthouse, Rockland Breakwater Lighthouse.
It arrived in 1902 at a height of 25 feet with a fourth order lens. First came the breakwater, which was approximately 4,000 feet, then came the light 2 years after. It was electrified in 1940 and automated in 1964.
It is a stag lighthouse with room for only the keeper and the assistant. There was no room for the family members.
And number 11, the last lighthouse on the cruise, Indian Island, originally called Pemaquid Point Light. It first arrived in 1850 with the current 37-foot tall light in 1874. It was deactivated in 1934 and sold to a family who still owns it today. A woodshed arrived in 1888 and a oil house in 1902.
We saw 11 lighthouses, some rough waters from a nearby storm, but ended the 9-hour cruise with a rainbow.
Well, it's the last and final day of our tour. And we started off with a cruise provided by the Maine Maritime Museum, which we will be visiting after the cruise. Now, this won't be as long as yesterday's over 8-hour cruise. This is only 2 hours long, and we'll see hopefully 6 lighthouses, including Doubling Point Range, Doubling Point, Sequin Island, Pond Island, Perkins Island, and Squirrel Point Lighthouse.
We are now on the merry meeting on the Kennebec River. The first light we are approaching is Doubling Point Lighthouse, established in 1899 at a height of 23 feet.
Doubling Point Lighthouse is the last of the existing lights of the Kennebec River, and it started on the riverbank but then was moved to the granite pier in 1899. A bell tower, boathouse, and oil house was added in 1906, and it was automated in 1935. Now, between the two Doubling Point lighthouses is Fiddler's Reach Fog Signal Building. It is located in Aroostook, Maine. It is approximately 1,100 feet southwest of the Doubling Point Rear Range Lighthouse and 2,000 feet east of Doubling Point Lighthouse. It was built in 1914, and the bell was used until the 60s, then a horn replaced it and used until it was discontinued in 1982.
Second was Doubling Point Range Lighthouse, established in 1898 at 13 feet in height. In the distance, Squirrel Point Lighthouse. Squirrel Point Lighthouse was established in 1898 at 25 feet in height.
A fifth order lens was installed in 1902. A boathouse was added in 1901. It was automated in 1980, and Squirrel Point Lighthouse is still active today.
Our next lighthouse, Perkins Island Lighthouse. Perkins Island Lighthouse arrived in 1898 at a height of 23 feet.
Along with the lighthouse, a wood frame keeper's house and a barn also was established in 1898 at Perkins Island. A boathouse arrived in 1901. An original fifth order lens was installed in 1902. It was automated in 1959. And it's approximately 2 miles from the mouth of the Kennebec River. But before we reach Pond Island and Sequin Island Lighthouse, we pass by Fort Poppin. It is located at the mouth of the Kennebec River in Phillipsburg, Maine. It stands in Grindle Point. It's the semicircular structure that started in 1862 but was never completed. It was used to store artillery and troops during World War I and World War II, but no shots were ever fired there.
We are now approaching Pond Island Lighthouse. Pond Island, first established in 1821, the current one behind us in 1855 at a height of 20 feet. A conical rubble stone tower and a small stone house is located on the 10 acres of land. Pond Island is on the west side entrance to the Kennebec River. Another tower arrived in 1835. It was rebuilt again in 1855, this time with the attached keeper's home. It was automated in 1960. The Coast Guard destroyed all the buildings in 1963 except for the lighthouse. Our last lighthouse, Sequin Lighthouse. Sequin Lighthouse was first established in 1795. The current was built in 1857 at a height of 53 feet. And it's considered one of the second highest lighthouses along the Atlantic coast. Sequin Island Lighthouse is 1/2 mile from the mouth of the Kennebec River. It was automated in 1985. Well, we successfully saw 6 lighthouses, a fort, a fog signal building, even an eagle, and safely made it back to shore. I'm in Bath, Maine, city of ships, at the Maine Maritime Museum on 20 acres of land which opened in 1909 with history from lobsters to lighthouses on the banks of the Kennebec River. It houses galleries and indoor and outdoor exhibits. It has the country's only surviving historic wooden shipyard. It has a working boat shop, a Victorian shipbuilder's home, and so much more. Of course, when you're at the Maine Maritime Museum, you have to go and see the second order Fresnel lens from Cape Elizabeth Lighthouse. Now those white poles you see behind me has a port and a stern. It's actually the Wyoming, the largest wooden vessel ever built in the United States. And it was actually built in a shipyard here. And behind me is the Fiddler's Reach fog bell. And if you look way in the distance, it was one of the first lighthouses we saw on our cruise, Grindle Point Lighthouse. Next up, we saw giant-size decorated pumpkins in downtown Damariscotta, Maine, on our way to the last lighthouse of our tour. One of the most visited and photographed lighthouses with over 100,000 visitors yearly. And this was Maine's first land-based lighthouse that was open to the public. And we are now climbing up 30 steps and 7 on the ladder to our last lighthouse on our tour. That's right, we're at the Lantern Room in Pemaquid Point Lighthouse. Pemaquid Point Lighthouse first arrived in 1827. The current 38-foot tall tower came in 1835. It was automated in 1934. $4,000 for a rubble stone lighthouse with a keeper's house. A conical granite tower came 8 years later. The fourth order Fresnel lens arrived in 1857, along with a new keeper's dwelling. Keeper's house is now a fisherman's museum since 1972. The bell house was damaged from the storm of January of 2024, but has been repaired this past summer. In fact, Hurricane Bob destroyed the bell house back in 1991. And Pemaquid Point Lighthouse is the first to have U.S. currency to have an image of a lighthouse on it. It's Maine's quarter. Well, unfortunately, that wraps up our United States Lighthouse Society Southern Maine and New Hampshire tour. We saw over 30 lighthouses, several museums and forts, a couple of movie locations, and so much more. I hope you enjoyed the ride. A show of this magnitude has a lot of people behind the scenes putting it together, and I would like to take a moment and thank those people. And I would like to thank Sue and Dominic and the rest of the crew of the Camden Harbors Cruises for getting us safely from lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to
to lighthouse, to lighthouse, to lighthouse, to lighthouse, and of course, safely back to port.
At this time, I would like to thank Captain Cindy Smith and narrator J.R. Phillips and the rest of the crew of the Merry Meeting, getting us safely to each and every lighthouse on this cruise. And I would like to thank the volunteers and staff at the Pemaquid Point Lighthouse for allowing us access inside and all the way up to the lantern room.
And I would like to thank our bus driver, Nancy, for getting us safely from destination to destination to destination to okay, you get the idea. And I would like to thank the United States Lighthouse Society for providing us this tour and our tour guides, Tina and Rick Hans. I'd like to thank our tour guide with all of his narration, Jeremy Dontrumont. And finally, I would like to thank the hardest working person I know, my wife, Carlene I, travel consultant, photographer, and shopper. If it wasn't for her, this trip would not be possible.
Hello, I'm John David Burha, on location at Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, Maine. This has been a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Southern Maine and New Hampshire tour. I hope you enjoyed the ride.